This film is what inspires me to keep going, because it teaches one powerful truth to anyone who's ever felt hopeless. The only thing that can truly defeat you in this world is yourself. On the first day of class, the boy clenched his pencil tightly, trying his best to stop himself from making strange sounds. But he still couldn't hold it in. The entire class burst into laughter. The teacher had had enough. She thought Brad was just seeking attention and acting out on purpose, so she called him up to the front and scolded him loudly, demanding he apologize to the entire class. Knowing he was in no position to argue, Brad did as she asked. He promised not to make those stupid noises again, but just as he returned to his seat, after class, the principal contacted Brad's mother, Ellen, saying the school had done all it could and advising her to withdraw him as soon as possible. Brad cried, saying he couldn't control it, but the principal dismissed it as an excuse. It wasn't just the principal. Even Ellen's friends questioned why Brad kept barking like a dog. Helpless, Ellen took her son to see a psychologist, but the doctor believed that Brad's tics were a result of his parents' divorce and that he was just acting out to get attention. His father, Norman, visited him and his younger brother from time to time. One day, Norman took them out to play baseball. Brad loved it there, because everyone had their own quirky movements and no one seemed to notice his strange noises. The three of them had a great time, but when they took a break, Brad's barking sounds still irritated his father.
You know what would be nice? One day! Without you acting up.
Brad stood frozen as his father scolded him, his eyes brimming with tears, while the people around them cast uncomfortable, judgmental glances his way. And that wasn't the only thing unusual about Brad. Whenever he got nervous, his legs would start shaking uncontrollably. That, too, angered his father.
Just stop it! Just stop it!
Norman believed Brad was simply being disobedient and lacked self-control. When it was time to leave, he gave the younger brother a heartfelt hug. Brad stood nearby, full of anticipation, but Norman made no move to embrace him. Brad had to step forward on his own and say, "I love you." Norman only patted his head briefly, then drove away. Even if the whole world turns its back on you, there will always be someone who stays by your side. That someone was his mom. Whenever her friends insulted her son, Ellen would fire back with sharp-tongued comebacks of her own.
You know, I think you might face the fact that you're a size 12. I can cut the label out if it makes you feel better.
To understand the real cause of Brad's barking, Ellen went to the library and searched through countless medical books. Eventually, she came across a disorder called Tourette Syndrome. People with this condition suffer from brain signal errors, which cause uncontrollable movements and sounds. Ellen immediately took the discovery to the psychologist. The doctor admitted his misjudgment, but also delivered a crushing blow. This condition has no known cure. Ellen broke down in tears. It meant her son would have to live with it for the rest of his life. But Brad went on to create a miracle that no one thought possible. And what's even more unbelievable, it's a true story. He had no special talents, no outrageous luck, no privileged background. All he had was more pain than most, and a determination not to give up. If the past 2 years have been tough for you, then please be patient and watch this story to the end. It just might change your life. After learning the truth about his condition, the first thing Brad did was call his father. He wanted him to know he wasn't acting out on purpose. For the first time, Norman realized he had misjudged his son. Tears of guilt finally welled up in his eyes. But now, he was even more worried about Brad's future. To help Brad understand the condition better, Ellen took him to a support group, hoping he could find encouragement from others who had succeeded. There, some people rolled their eyes, some twitched their faces. They all had their own tics. Brad finally realized how others might see him, but the hope Ellen expected wasn't there. These people sat together in a circle, all complaining about how unfairly society had treated them. Some stayed home all day, others attended special needs schools. Every word seemed to carry labels of disability and defeat. Seeing this overwhelming negativity, Ellen decided to leave with her son and told him to forget everything he'd seen that night. But Brad said,
"I don't want to forget this, Mom. These people let Tourette's win. I'm never going to do that."
And with that spirit of defiance, Brad made it to middle school. When classmates mocked him again, he endured it in silence. To avoid distracting others in class, He even sat in the very back row, facing away from everyone, letting out his strange sounds in silence. Even then, the teacher still kicked him out of class. And just then, the principal happened to walk by. Brad braced himself for another scolding. He'd gotten used to it. But instead, the principal asked him, "Do you know what school is really for?" Brad froze. He didn't know how to answer. Then the principal invited him to the school concert that afternoon. Brad shook his head immediately. He knew his noises would ruin the performance. But the principal insisted, and Brad reluctantly showed up. As he feared, his barking sounds were more noticeable than the show itself. Everyone turned to look at him. After the performance, the principal asked, "Did anyone hear some strange noises just now?" Everyone replied, "Yes," and turned toward Brad. Embarrassed, he wished he could sink into the ground. To make matters worse, the principal then called Brad up to the stage and asked a question that no other teacher had ever asked before.
Do you like making noises and upsetting people, Brad?
No, sir.
Then why do you do it?
Well, Brad, because I have Tourette Syndrome. Rob,
What's that?
it's a thing in my brain that causes me to make weird noises.
But you could control it if you wanted to, right?
No, sir. It's a sickness.
Well, why can't you just get cured?
There isn't any cure. I don't like making noises any more than you like hearing them.
Brad also explained that his condition got worse when he was nervous, but if people didn't stare at him like he was strange, it would actually improve. The room fell silent. Then the principal asked, "So what can we do to help you?"
I just want to be treated like everybody else.
Good job. Yes, sir.
Brad walked down the steps, still making his signature sounds. But this time, instead of laughter, he was met with sincere applause from his classmates. One by one, the students stood up. For the first time in his life, Brad felt the warmth of encouragement and recognition. For the first time, he didn't need to apologize to anyone. He turned to look at the principal, the person who had changed his life with just a few words. In that moment, he finally understood that the purpose of school was never just about teaching facts. It was about shaping people. This is the true power of education. From that day on, Brad made a firm decision. He would become a teacher who never gives up on his students. After over 10 years of hard work and studying, he graduated from college with excellent grades, and even received a priority job recommendation from the school. He always wore a bright, confident smile. As for the strange sounds he sometimes made, this is how he explained them to others.
A dog. Yes, ma'am. That's my dog.
Although confidence helped Brad openly embrace his condition, Tourette Syndrome was still a tough obstacle. During job interviews at schools, he couldn't help but let out those involuntary noises. From the look on the principal's face, it was clear that Brad's interview had already failed. But Brad wasn't discouraged. If one school said no, he'd move on to the next. Still, no matter where he went, when people saw this well-dressed, handsome young man making strange noises, their expressions always turned puzzled. Brad would immediately explain his condition. On the surface, they all seemed polite and told him to wait for a reply. But deep down, the outcome was already decided. When Norman heard about his son's repeated interview failures, he brought Brad to his construction site. He believed that compared to teaching, the noisy environment of a work site might be better for Brad. No one would notice his barking sounds there. But Brad remained firm in chasing his dream. One day, a school finally agreed to give him a chance. But the principal said, "We do have an urgent vacancy, and with your condition, maybe you can help out for now." Brad instantly realized this principal had no true sense of responsibility or care for students. He turned down the offer without hesitation. But the moment he walked out of that school, Brad could no longer hold in his emotions. Years of frustration and humiliation exploded as he screamed into the steering wheel and broke down in tears alone in his car. In that moment, did he ever waver in his determination? Then his mother called. "If you don't want to keep going," she said gently, "just come home. I'll always be here with you." That phone call awakened something in Brad. Even though Tourette's made it hard for him to speak a full sentence, he had never written the word "give up" into his life. He pulled out a map and circled all the schools he hadn't applied to yet. then traveled back and forth every day, holding on to hope. At the same time, Brad worked part-time at his dad's construction site to help cover daily expenses. But as more red X's filled the map, his chances kept shrinking. The new school year was getting closer. If he couldn't land a job soon, his dream of becoming a teacher would be over. But in the end, fate opened a window for him. One day, he got a call from a school called Mountain View Elementary. They had heard about the strange young man who'd been applying to schools all over the city. Before he even walked through the door, the principal curiously asked, "So why do you want to be a teacher?" Brad answered honestly, "Because a principal once gave me the motivation. That inspired my belief in becoming a teacher. I want to become an educator who's different from the rest, and my Tourette's is the best teacher I've ever had." He also shared his unshakable passion for teaching and spoke openly about his condition. They talked for over 2 hours. It was the best interview of Brad's life. As he left, he glanced back at the students' classrooms, eyes full of hope and longing. A few days later, he faced the second round of interviews. Despite tough questions and resistance from some, Brad turned every challenge into a strength. Finally, he was called into the office for one last meeting.
Teaching our kids to never let anything hold them back in life. And Hillary said if we're going to talk the talk, we need to walk the walk. She's waiting to show you your classroom. Welcome.
At that moment, Brad's dream finally came true. The other teachers even rushed over to help him decorate his classroom and carry in supplies. When his mother heard the news, she burst into tears of joy. But the school only gave Brad a 1-year contract. In the year ahead, he would have to prove himself through action and silence all the doubts once and for all. On the first day of class, Brad decorated the classroom like a small garden. Every corner and detail from the door frame to the windowsill was thoughtfully arranged, and he even kept an adorable little rabbit. Finally, he put on a captain's hat and warmly welcomed the students. Even when a mischievous boy called him a freak, Brad wasn't bothered at all. Instead, he boldly wrote Tourette Syndrome on the blackboard and told the whole class they were free to ask him any questions. A boy raised his hand and asked, "Is it contagious?" Brad replied, "No, because I was born with it." "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes when my neck twitches, there's a bit of pain, but it goes away once I make a sound." "Can you still go to the movies?" "Of course I can, but most of the time I get kicked out." A little girl asked, "Will you get better one day?" Brad answered regretfully, "There's no cure for this condition right now, but I've learned to accept it and not let it control my life." The students kept asking questions, and Brad patiently answered each one. But there was one thing he could never do. All the students excitedly asked what it was. The first class ended in a joyful atmosphere. The children loved their funny and friendly teacher Brad, and when they left the school, each one gave him a warm hug goodbye. But the prejudice in people's hearts is like a mountain. No matter how well he did, some parents still whispered in the background. The very next day, a father insisted on transferring his daughter to a different class. This was a big blow to Brad. After the transfer, the girl would quietly peek into his class through the doorway whenever he was teaching. Brad noticed and felt heartbroken, but there was nothing he could do. There was a special girl in the class named Heather. She listened attentively, always participated, and greeted Brad every day after school. But Brad began to notice Heather was losing more and more hair. Heather cheerfully explained it was because she was undergoing chemotherapy. Brad's face froze. That's when Heather's mom stepped in and quietly told Brad the truth. Heather had cancer and didn't have much time left. Her mother hadn't wanted anyone to know until she met you.
And I'd be grateful if you kept her secret a little longer. I just don't want her to be singled out.
Yeah.
Brad held back his tears and waved goodbye to Heather with a smile. From then on, he did everything he could to care for Heather in his own quiet way. Although Heather was always lively and cheerful, she also had her worries. She told her teacher, "I always see my mom hiding in her room crying quietly. That makes me really sad." Heather was heartbreakingly mature. One day, she didn't come to school. Brad gathered the whole class to make gifts for her. But Heather wasn't the only one Brad was concerned about. There was also a boy in his class named Thomas, who had ADH. He couldn't focus and constantly ran around disrupting others. The vice principal directly suggested Brad should have Thomas withdrawn from the school. But Brad had heard those words too many times when he was a child, and he refused to give up on him. Instead, he patiently tutored Thomas one-on-one. Thomas said he hated reading. Brad thought for a moment and replied, "Me too. Reading has always been really hard for me." Thomas was shocked. "But you're a teacher." So Brad had Thomas open a book and experience for himself what it felt like to live with Tourette's. Only then did Thomas realize how small his own struggles were in comparison to his teacher's. With Brad's patient guidance and company, Thomas finally began to settle down and read. In doing so, Brad saved a child who had been destined to be cast aside. As his career began to thrive, Brad met a kind girl named Nancy. They shared many common interests, and even his mom liked her a lot. But in the quiet of night, Brad didn't dare hope for their future. He was afraid that one day she might get tired of his constant tics. Ellen gently reassured him. No matter what moment of despair Brad went through, it was always his mother who stayed by his side. But from now on, would the one by his side be that girl instead? A few weeks later, Brad received the one piece of news he never wanted to hear. Sweet little Heather had left this world forever. He was invited to her funeral, but he stood at the door, unable to bring himself to go in. He was afraid his sounds would disturb the solemn silence of the service. But Heather's mother insisted he come in. For Brad, that was the greatest recognition he could ever receive as a teacher. After that, he continued to teach with even more passion and care than before. While fulfilling his dream of being a great teacher, he decided to pursue one more goal: graduate school. A challenge already daunting for most people, and nearly impossible for someone who struggled even to read. After many complications, he finally got permission to take the test in a private room. But due to his Tourette's, he had to exhaust all his strength just to suppress the tics. In the end, he wasn't able to finish the test. Then came the school's annual teacher evaluation. The evaluator stood outside observing and taking notes. Brad, inside the classroom, was encouraging students to think freely and creatively. He even brought in his friend's giant Optimus Prime truck for the kids to see. When he saw the evaluator outside, he still chose to take the students out for a hands-on experience. The children had the time of their lives on the giant truck. New experiences always expand a child's imagination and creativity. The evaluator recorded everything in their notebook. A few days later, Brad was called into a classroom where all his students and fellow teachers were gathered. The vice principal stood before everyone and announced, "The evaluator has been observing and assessing Mr. Brad over the past few days. It's now time to decide whether he'll continue teaching next year." Brad instantly tensed up.
And I'm here to announce that our very own Brad Cohen has been chosen from amongst all the new educators in the state of Georgia to be Sally Mae's first-year Teacher of the Year.
The kids burst into cheers. His colleagues offered warm congratulations. At the awards ceremony, Brad held his girlfriend's hand as he walked to the stage. But out of nervousness, he once again let out one of his strange sounds. This time, no one laughed. Even his father, who had once doubted him, smiled proudly from the audience. Brad expressed his gratitude to everyone around him, and also thanked an old friend who had been with him for years. Tourette Syndrome. When he said what he had learned from it, the kids instinctively raised their hands to answer, "Yes."
Yes, Galen.
You learn to keep going.
Eli?
You learn not to let it stop you.
Yes, Thomas.
You learn not to let it win.
We should never let anything stop us from chasing our dreams. This film is based on the real-life story of Brad Cohen, and the real Brad is still moving forward with courage and determination. At age 28, he decided to take the graduate exam again, and 3 years later, he was accepted into the education program at Stanford University. Through his journey, he proved that life really can change. Even if you were born with nothing, dream like an eagle. Even if life is fragile as paper, stand tall with an unbreakable spirit. We may not choose how we begin, but we can always choose how we live. Even if born into despair, we can still live with hope.